Today's a big day for Project 964, the biggest upgrade for the car to date. Today we're at TPC Racing and we're going to be installing the KW suspension.
Be sure to log into your YouTube account, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a video.
So Tom, thank you to you and Mike and the folks at TPC for taking on the next step for Project 964, which is installing the KW suspension.
It's always a pleasure to do it for PCA, and plus we always have a ton of fun doing it.
So before we get started, you recommended that we bring the car in and we're gonna sort of take level set. What are we doing with it?
Yes, the first step we do when installing a coilover is to measure the current ride height. We make sure that the tire pressures are set so the car is sitting at equal height all four corners. And I know that some of the suspension manufacturers have a recommended baseline ride height, but some of them don't. But it's always a good idea to know what the actual ride height is before we get started. Then we can also consult with the car owner if there's any criteria for steep driveway, trailer ramps, and anything like that before we get started. So Rogan is one of our race team mechanics, and Rogan is going to measure the ride height for us before we get started.
All right, so Rogan, I brought my overalls, I brought my gloves. I'm going to help out, just what you wanted, right?
Sounds perfect.
And of course, Tom made a comment earlier that if I help, it's probably going to take 8 hours longer.
Hopefully not.
All right, let's do this.
But as long as you're buying pizza, we're okay.
That's good.
So we're going to be checking the ride height before we install the coilovers. To do so, the easiest way to do it, just to get a base measurement, you can just grab a simple tape ruler, put the end down onto the ground, and you normally want to center it up with the center of the wheel. And you'll measure from the ground to the lip of the fender arch, or the wheel well, which here I've got a measurement of, I'll go in millimeters, 645 millimeters in the left rear. So it's important to write down what you have so you can always circle back and check. And I'll go ahead and do that for each of the four corners. Now before off camera, we also made sure all of the tires were set to an even level. That way, one corner of the car isn't jacked up higher from a different tire pressure. Here we've got 646. So it's pretty even all around, maybe a 1 mil difference, but now we've got our baseline numbers. So that way when we go to install the coilovers, we can try and match it as best we can or make any changes depending on what the customer wants.
So thanks to KW, this feels a little bit like Christmas. Let's open up our present. Woo! All right, so right away we see some tools.
Comes with a nice KW toolkit.
Let's open it up and see what's in it. Nicely packaged. So that's
your
the
spanner wrench.
Spanner wrench. What's this for?
That's for the set screws on the locking collars.
Okay, and then your adjustment.
Yep, your adjustment knob there.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
Nicely
And
packaged. Oh boy.
Real prize.
There we go.
Those are
So
nice.
now I'm guessing this doesn't include everything that we'll need to do the suspension swap, right? Or does it?
It should include most of it. It looks like they're set up to use the OEM rubber bushings for the top mount, at least for the fronts. The rears look like they're all ready to go, so it shouldn't require too much extra.
So we're gonna need to be careful when we're disassembling the original suspension because we're gonna reuse the top mounts if they're in good shape, and hopefully they are.
Hopefully they are.
But if not, then those of you that are installing this at home, you might want to get a set of top mounts just in case yours aren't. That way you're not waiting a week in between disassembling and reinstalling.
Yep.
All right, let's do this.
Let's do it.
All right, pretty much the only thing that he's gonna allow me to do today is take the wheels off. And before you start cringing because I have an impact going for these lug nuts. These are actually steel lug nuts. These are not the original aluminum ones. If you have the original aluminum lug nuts, you definitely don't want to use an impact on those because they could actually mess them up, right?
Yep, they'll round them out.
All right, so here we go. All right, so now that the wheel's off, you want to do a little assessment of what we're looking at?
Yeah, so you can definitely tell these are the original struts that came on the car from factory. Just a few signs of aging.
Just a bit, just a bit of aging.
A bit of a crunchy dust boot there.
Yeah, but I didn't know that this is obviously the factory suspension, but they are also adjustable.
They are. A lot of the, in fact, all the cars came with the adjustments on there from factory. You don't get as much room for adjustment as you do with an aftermarket coilover, but it does give you the option to raise or lower your car without having to purchase additional parts.
All right, so let's take a look at the back and the condition of those.
All right. All right, so looking at the back, pretty similar to the front. Looks like the dust boot is actually more intact than the other. Overall, not too bad. This one does look like the rears have more room for adjustment than the front does.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one thing I learned today that I didn't know was, I believe 89 to 90 suspension setup, especially at the top, is a bit different from the later models. I never really referred to 964.1s or .2s, but there is technically a .1, .2 style. And with the new KW suspension, they provide us with the universal top hat for the rears. So it will work for the .1 cars as well as the .2. So that'll be cool.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So let's get into it. Today our best friend is going to be Nutcracker. Being an old car, a lot of things are rusty. Corrosion happens over time. So you want to get down, spray this on any nut, bolt, anything you're going to be taking off the car. It's going to save you a lot of time, a lot of hassle. Hopefully it works its wonders. So let's see. Now, right off the bat, I can also see the bushings on the sway bar link are definitely torn and gone. Would want to be something to replace in the future, but for right now, not the biggest concern. And unplug your sensors, wheel speed, and brake pads. Yeah, a lot of these rubber parts are not in the best shape, which is going to happen over time. Rubber does tend to crack with age. So we're basically just taking off any parts that are connected to the strut. That way, when it comes time to take it off, there's nothing grabbing or holding on to it, getting in our way. Need a flathead to remove the brake line from the strut. This clip for the brake line holding it on, pretty rusty. So I want to just wiggle it a little bit, break up some of the rust on there.
So we thought we'd take the opportunity to show you what a suspension looks like from 1990, and look at this, all this rust under here, and that's why Rogan was spraying liberally the Nutcracker solution, so that later on when he's working with these bolts, that hopefully they'll come free. Okay, so this car's age is really starting to show itself as we're taking a look at things closer back here. So just check out, look, these boots are all rotted out, and this will have to be replaced. So the first fairly significant obstacle that we're running up against is getting this brake line off of the strut tower. And the factory one, the brake line sits inside of this bracket, and Rogan's
trying to be careful not to mess up the brake line. And what we're deciding to do, since we're not going to reuse this old strut, we're just going to cut this tab off and then deal with it unattached to the shock, so that way it's a little bit easier and safer and we don't mess up the brake line. Now what's interesting, the factory one, it's just a hole, and with this aftermarket KW, they've actually leaves you a slot, so you can just pull the brake line in and out fairly easily. So nice little adjustment they did for this.
All right, so we got the strut loose from the front upright here. We had to cut the bracket that holds the front brake line on. It was easier just to sacrifice that bracket than risk damaging the brake line itself. We were able to get that out, disconnect all of the sensors and wiring, and then it's just 2 pinch bolts on the back, 10mm Allens, and take those out. The strut is now free to move, and so what we're going to go ahead and continue to do is lower the car down, unbolt the strut from the tower, and it should be able to come right out, and we'll swap over the top hat onto our new KWs. So these 2 holes here are where the 10mm Allen pinch bolts go that holds the strut onto the upright. This is your connector that will be in this bracket normally, which will transfer over onto the new strut. It'll disconnect for the wheel speed sensor, your brake pad life sensor, and the ground for the wheel speed sensor here. And to make things a little bit easier, to be able to move this upright around, to be able to make room to get the strut off, I also disconnected the sway bar link here, which was just to a 17 mil head bolt, and then the nut here. It'll just slide right out, and now it moves a little bit easier to get access for this strut.
So while Rogan is taking everything off, it's actually a great idea to set up the new suspension before it goes on the car, because some of the access points for the suspension settings is going to be difficult to get to. So if you read the instructions, which we really should, you actually find out that this setup is specific for this car, and in the instructions it tells you where each of the adjustments should be. So for the front axle, it should be at 9 clicks open, and the rear axle at 6 clicks open. Now what does that all mean? So let's walk through that. So here we have the front axle, which they say is 9 clicks open. So what you do is you're going to turn it to full clockwise stop, and you don't need to muscle it. You just turn it lightly until it stops. Okay, and it stops right there. And when it says 9 clicks open for the front axle, you're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So that puts us right here at the 3 marker. And we already did it for the other one, so we know this one's matching at the 3 marker. Now rebounds typically on a suspension going to be on the top here. And they're saying this should be at, let's see, this is the front again. This should also be at 9 clicks open. And they provide you with this little tool that you'll carefully insert in here, and you're going to do the same. You're going to go close it by going clockwise. Again, just lightly turn it. You don't have to twist it so hard, and you'll recognize when it stops. And there it has stopped. And now you're going to go 9 clicks back. What we found is the clicks on the top part of this here is not as defined, so you're going to have to do it by feel. So you're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And there you have it. So now they're all set up, ready to go in the car.
So we're ready to remove the strut. So once you pop the hood open, you'll have to pull back the carpet and sound deadening to gain access to your strut tower. Very simple. Once the strut is loose down low, all it is 4 13mm nuts here, and the whole strut assembly should just drop down out of the bottom. You want to be careful though to hold on to the strut while you're removing the last nut. That way it doesn't just completely drop out. So, and they're not very tight, so you don't need any air or electric tools, just by hand. And when you're tightening them back up, doesn't require a lot of torque. Make sure to grab the washers. You don't want them to drop down inside. There, put them off to the side. And this last one here. So you can tell these have been in here for a while, considering I'm taking the last nut off and the whole assembly isn't dropping down. So it'll take a little bit of persuasion to get it to come down. So grab hold of it. You might actually need to, there it is. And there's your old strut out. So we'll go ahead and transfer the top head over onto our new KW, and we'll be able to reassemble this corner.
So Rogan already dropped the driver's side, but the little factoid that Tom pointed out to us here, if you look here, you notice that the top of the strut is really set inward towards the car here. And that actually was not delivered from the factory that way. At some point in this car's life, this would have been delivered where it's actually set on more towards the outside of the car, but someone has flipped them around to give them more camber. So that's like a little, you know, performance edge where you're not introducing an aftermarket piece. It might be due to your class and such, but they can flip it around, gain a little bit of extra performance advantage while utilizing stock parts. All right, Tom, so what does this little helper spring do?
Yeah, so a lot of aftermarket high-performance coilovers and even some of the OEM GT cars come with 2 springs. This is what is known as a helper spring. So this spring here is relatively lightweight. I can compress these with my fingers. So when you put the car's weight on it, they will always collapse because they're only like 100 to 100 and maybe 20 pounds. So they act as if it's a solid piece of metal once the car's weight is on it. So they're not a dual stage for comfort like what most people think, but what they're for is for ride height adjustment. Because the mainspring, they typically come in 1-inch increments in height. So let's say you're setting your ride height that is in between the 1-inch increment. Then you don't want the spring just bouncing around with a lot of free play. So you want this relatively light spring here to take up the slack so everything is preloaded so the spring won't get dislocated when you hit a bump. You know, this part doesn't bend, but you can see from the reflection, it's got like high spots and low. I can even feel when I run my fingers up and down, it has high spots and low spots. So this means when it catches at some point, it's gonna stick, which is in the shock industry is known as stiction.
So you can see we just got the spring and the top hat off of the old strut. You can see it left quite a mess. The dust boot was in pretty bad shape, very dry, and it just disintegrated on us as we were taking things apart. But it's amazing to see how much dirt and grime builds up on these over time, especially getting onto the toolbox here. So just a fun little representation of kind of what old parts can do to your workspace. We got the top hat off and we inspected it to make sure that we are able to reuse it on our new strut. And having a closer look at it, although it's old, it does seem to be in pretty good shape. So we're gonna go ahead and use it on our new strut. You can see the rubber up top and on bottom, it's all intact. It's a little bit dry, but it'll work. It'll be fine. So we're gonna go ahead and install it on our new strut. That way we can get it into the car and carry on with the install. The lock collars, just to add a little bit of WD-40, help it move a little bit, help protect the threads. So I'm gonna back this down. This is gonna help take tension off the spring, essentially what we were using the spring compressor for before, but now it's safe to remove. That top isn't gonna just fly off. And this nut is already loose here. And we'll go ahead, spacer goes on top here. Go ahead, slide that onto here. I might need to back it off a little bit more. That up. There it is. So, got the thread started on this top nut here. You want to tighten it down by hand. And I'm gonna tighten it down here. You can kind of tell it's starting to move on the inside here. So you'll need to grab a wrench like this, used for oxygen sensors, or in this case it's not open like an oxygen sensor, but this will still work. And you'll need to hold the top piece here. That way you can counter it. All right, so that's it there. We can always tighten it down more once it's on the car, but for now, that's on there. And we'll go ahead, install this into the car, get everything put back together, and then we'll be able to set the height. Just try and compare it based off of the old strut for where the locking collar was. And then we'll be good. All right, so we got the top hat on. Now it's time to reassemble everything in this left front corner. So basically just doing the reverse of how we were taking it out. You'll slide strut up in, and you'll get your 4 washers and nuts. Put those on, and then we'll torque everything down. And remember, it doesn't take a lot of torque for these, just enough to touch down and then a little bit extra to hold it on there. Even on the newer cars, it's the same thing. These top nuts don't get too tight. All right, so that's in there. Again, just your 13mm socket. Like to touch them all down and then torque them. That way you're torquing it evenly and one isn't giving you any trouble. There. There. And just double check as it's pulling it up that they're all good. And that's everything for the top here. Once you do the other side, then you can lay the carpet and the sound deadening back to cover over everything. But for now, we'll raise the car up and get to putting everything back together inside the wheel well. So putting this all back together, we're going to be using all the same parts. The only difference is the top bolt, top pinch bolt for the new strut. It's a slightly different design. There was a bracket on the old strut that would hold the nuts in. The difference here is the top bolt is actually an eccentric. So on these, The camber adjustment is a slot on the strut itself. Same with the factory strut, but this time you're going to have a pinch bolt that you'll be able to adjust camber, but we're going to just put it back where the way it was at the same location. That way we haven't changed any of the geometry of the car. So putting this all back together, it's also an important thing to do is put anti-seize on the bolts and the nuts that you're installing. That way when you go to work on the car later down the road, it's not locked up, less rust, just saves you the headache later on. And we'll go ahead, same thing, slide the strut onto the upright like so. It's just a little tricky. That's there. And that's in. So we completed the front assembly here. The last thing we needed to do was hook up the sway bar end link. We had detached it, at least from the left side, just to make it a little bit easier moving the upright out of the way to take the strut out. But it was giving us a hard time putting it back in because we had left it connected on the right side of the car, and the weight of that was pulling the sway bar too far down to reconnect. So now that we have the struts in and the uprights attached, we were able to get the bolt in, torque it down, and now the front is ready to go. So we're going to move on to the back. For this, you got to remove a few things in the engine bay to gain access to the strut bolts in the back. So on the right-hand side, you'll have to remove the cover for the engine air filter housing. Just a few tabs here, one on the bottom, and then there's two in the back. Do the same thing. Very easy just to pop those off. And then you should be able to maneuver it out. Might have to remove the hose here, maybe. Trying to be careful.
Nice way to put it.
There it is.
There we go.
Nice. So once that's out of your way, once you get the cover for the air box out, you can see back in here you have your rear strut tower, and you've actually got 3 bolts instead of 4 like it is in the front. Kind of tucked away back there. You'll still kind of have to sneak back in and remove those. So you want to pop this off of here. Might be easier once it's loosened up a little bit. That way it moves a little bit more. There we go. You want to be careful, depending, this seems like it's a newer part. If it's an original part, these can be very brittle and they do break, so you just want to be gentle as you're loosening that up. Then you want to unhook here. You've got a clamp you'll need to loosen up here, and there are 2 10mm bolts that hold the blower motor on. Once you remove those, then you should be able to kind of move it out of your way. Depending on how much room you have, might need to just remove this as well. So let me get some tools and take care of that. Yeah, it's loose now. Undo those clamps. Find a place for this.
Get him to bring stuff to the racetrack, so if there's one, we're not.
There we go. I've got one connector back here that you'll have to undo. Should just pop right off, like so. There we go. That'll come right out. And this see this tower still a little bit far back. Need to reach around, undo the 3 here, but not too bad. Now you've got blower motor out of your way. Let's see. So, got a 22 mil bolt here on the bottom. Wow. And there we go. Once you get this bottom bolt out, then we'll go back up top, undo those 3 nuts, and the rear strut should just drop right out, no problem. So you'll have to reach back and undo the 3 13 mils like we did in the front. Might be a little bit tricky because you don't have as much room.
Like what, 1/5 of my hard drive.
All right, we're gonna go the extra step because we actually found a little mouse condominium at the top here, so we're gonna clean that out before we button things up. All right, so the next part is a 2-person job. I have the nuts here for the top of the strut mount. He's gonna feed it up. I'm gonna spin them in place. We have some high temperature anti-seize on the threads, just in case, for future. And of course you want to take care not to cross thread anything.
So when installing the rears for the bottom mounting point, you're going to have a bronze spacer. You're going to want to have that going towards the outside of the car against the upright. The OEM spacer that you took off with the factory strut, that's going to stay on the inside of the car and connect with the area that does not have the bronze spacer.
It's almost the moment of truth. We're getting ready to put it down, but before we do that, Rogan is putting together the blower motor. He's got the air cleaner to put back on. Wheels have already been put on. Now we're actually not going to completely finish the car today suspension-wise because we're waiting for our wheels to come in from HRE. And it's actually better for us to make sure that we mount the wheels that are going to stay on this car before we do the alignment. So once the wheels come in, we'll mount some great Pirelli tires on it, and then we'll throw it on the alignment rack and we'll continue this video and finish it all up.
Yep, you're good. Woohoo!